Alright kids, let's do this new moon in solar eclipse video that we have been talking about. Let me see if I can move this down a little bit. I can. Oh my god, let me see if I can move this up a little bit. I can. Now you can. Goodness. Okay, there we go. Hi. So, Mercury is retrograde, and my iPhone has only so much storage. So if this video gets cut off, do not panic. I'm not going to do it again. And I'm just going to do another one, a follow-up to it tomorrow. Or later today, or I'll figure it out. There's a fair amount of content that I want to share with you, so we might get cut off, but let's keep going. We had a new moon solar eclipse in the sign of Cancer last night, 11:42 p.m. Pacific time on June the 20th. June the 21st for many of you, and you can translate the time into whatever you want to do, or Google it and figure it out. Okay. Someone in the video I did yesterday, which was about Mercury in Cancer, Mercury retrograde in Cancer. The planet Mercury came into Cancer, the sign of Cancer, on May 28th, I believe. It went retrograde on July. My least favorite thing about Mercury retrograde is these kinds of slip-ups. I call June July and July June, and the dates are harder to recall, and it's like your brain turns into a kind of slushy mush, and you're trying to walk through it, you know, just wade through the treacle and mush in your mind. Bottom line, Mercury came into the sign of Cancer on May the 28th. It went retrograde, on June the 18th, and of course June the 20th or 21st, wherever you are, we had the new moon solar eclipse in Cancer. When I did the Mercury retrograde in Venus, Mercury retrograde Jeepers in Cancer video yesterday, someone left a comment and said, what is the point of doing an eclipse video after an eclipse? If it's a new moon solar eclipse, there's every point in doing a video after. The energy of a new moon occurs after a new moon. The energy of a solar eclipse occurs after the solar eclipse. The energy of a full moon or a lunar eclipse culminates as you head towards that lunar eclipse or that full moon. Now with a full moon, I even say wait 24 odd hours after that. It could be, the wave could continue to be tumbling onto the shore, but there is that aspect of it. So the other thing that I find is that when I do new moon videos after a new moon, as opposed to 48 hours or 24 hours before, it gets better circulation, more people see it. It has that warmth or energy or the wind behind the sails that a new moon gives us everything. Whereas the 24 to 48 hours before a new moon is flatter, deader. I mean, look at the Tulsa rally. Anyway, of course, astrologers aren't consulted for stuff like this. Why do a rally before a new moon or before a new moon? You know, it kind of has things at that point in time, 24 to 48 hours before a new moon, have a kind of a stillborn quality. They have a put your feet up quality. They have a flat quality. People do not have energy. Energy is depleted. It's a depressed quality. Now, of course, there are all sorts of other factors why things may not get circulation right now with the lockdown and COVID and quarantine and the cases increasing and all that kind of stuff. But irrespective, that is why I like to do my new moon videos after a new moon. Now, some people may say, why not do them 2 weeks before like other astrologers on YouTube and a week before? I'm just like, you know, my reason for that is I can do my videos sooner, but they will be much more theoretical. The reason why I like to do my videos closer to when things are happening is because I feel a lot more connected to the transit. I feel like I can read the transit more effectively. Okay, enough said. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, I'm a firm believer in the fact that astrologers and tarot readers and mediums and diviners on YouTube are here to connect with the people they're meant to connect to, and each person has their own following and their tribe. So find folks who resonate with you. And I'm not saying I don't because you asked me a question, or whoever is wondering that, I'm giving you the answer, and the answer may resonate, or you might find it interesting. Absolutely stick with me if you feel like there's information out of this that is useful to you. But it's also permission, I guess, for people to feel like what works for you, what is working for you. You know, these are free resources for all intents and purposes for you guys. So find your diviners accordingly, and be careful of spending a lot of time in this kind of waiting and divination space. Find the balance between watching a lot of videos on YouTube and actually being in action. looking at your chart all the time and actually being in action, pulling tons of tarot cards and actually being in action, co-create, be in that space. All right, so that's why I like to do my new moon videos after. Sometimes I do them before, but that's why I like to do them after. Now, it is a new moon, so typical things related to a new moon apply. Greater energy returns. The only difference with this particular new moon, it has to be said, is that it's happening when Mercury is retrograde. So there may be a slight delay. It might be a little bit more retrospective. It might mean that if there are activities that have a mental component or a written component or a communication component or a technology component and you're getting to them, it takes you 3 times as long to be able to get to them and track. You may be more deliberate with this new moon, and it's not a bad thing. Let that be the first thing relevant to this new moon solar eclipse in Cancer. You may find yourself more deliberate, especially Mercury went retrograde on, let me see if I can do this, June the 18th, goes direct on July the 12th. Oh, that's nice. See, if you're just that much more deliberate, if you are not rushing around, if you just take the second to go, is it June or is it July? Is it the 18th? Is it the 12th? Is it? That is, there you have it, folks. Mercury retrograde energy. And how you just have to slow yourself down and take the effort to make sure that your recall and your attention details is strong enough. You just can't rush around. Mercury is one of the 2 planets that one can associate with speed. And I have 2 videos on Mercury now. Mercury in Cancer video 2 videos ago, Mercury retrograde in Cancer video yesterday. So you can look at all the Mercury stuff to your heart's content in those 2 videos. Now, it's a new moon, which means energy from a new moon is now going to expand till July the 4th, which is a full moon. It's also a lunar eclipse, and then it's going to start to peter down as we get to the next new moon, which is on July the 20th. And as I mentioned in my last 2 videos, we this year are going to have 2 new moons in the sign of Cancer. We rarely have 2 new moons or 2 full moons in one sign. We get it now. The first one is less than 24 hours ago, this new moon solar eclipse, and then there's another new moon that occurs on July the 20th, by which time Venus is direct and Mercury is direct. And these lunation energies carry to then the next new moon, which will be in Leo, the sign after Cancer, on August the 18th. So somewhere, at least from a lunar perspective, this new moon solar eclipse that occurred yesterday at 11:42 p.m. Pacific time on June the 20th, translate accordingly, sets up energy and activity that is going to carry us through August the 20th, August the 18th. See, if I just paused there and just really been like, when is the new moon in Leo? It would have worked out August the 18th. Now, Mercury, with this particular new moon, as I've mentioned, Mercury's entry into the sign of Cancer on May the 28th has already brought, and it's like the table is laid out. It's like the curriculum is out there. It's like the announcement has been made and come to you through communication about what it is that this new moon eclipse is asking you to tackle for the one final time. Why one final time? Because this is the last new moon solar eclipse in Cancer for another 17 to 19 years. We've been having eclipses in Cancer since July. Let me slow down. We've been having eclipses in Cancer since July the 12th, 2018. Specifically, we had a new moon solar eclipse in Cancer on July the 12th, 2018. So July the 12th and September the 12th of 2018 would be important dates. We had a lunar eclipse in Cancer on January 20th, 2019, which means November 20th of 2018 and January 20th of 2019 would be important dates. We then had a discrete eclipse cycle with a solar eclipse on July the 2nd, 2019, and a corresponding lunar eclipse on, January 10th, 2020, earlier this year, when Saturn and Pluto were just getting conjunct. Interesting. So let's just go over the dates again. July 12th, 2018, September 12th, 2018, 2 months after the eclipse, I find with a solar eclipse is important. January 20th, 2019, a full moon lunar eclipse. 2 months before that is important, so November 20th, 2018. Next solar eclipse on July the 2nd, 2019, so another important date would be September 2nd, 2019. The next full moon lunar eclipse on January 10th, 2020, which means that November the 10th, 2019 would be an important date. And now here we have it, the final solar eclipse on June the 21st, 2020, or June 20th, depending on where you are, which means that August 10th, August 20th, jeepers, Mercury retrograde, August the 20th becomes an important date as well. And as I've mentioned, this particular lunation, because there's a second new moon on July the 20th, takes us through to about August 18th, August 20th anyway. So it's a 2-month period here. The last, energetically, I don't mean physically, I mean energetically, the eclipse that occurred last night was in the same degree as the eclipse that occurred on June the 21st, 2001. June the 21st, 2001. So if you think back to energies, and indeed energies at play in 2000 and 2001 would correspond energetically to energies at play since July 2018 till now. Now, what this means, as I mentioned in my last 2 videos, is that this is an opportunity, to your surprise, to your dismay, to your excitement, to your understanding. Since May the 28th, things may have come up that you thought were put to bed or almost complete for a final reckoning, for you to deal with them. And it's important to deal with them because these are the eclipses in Cancer are North Node eclipses, so we are meant to lean into them. And that basically means we're meant to lean into them because our soul's development, with their skills that we are meant to develop in the sign of Cancer, where Cancer sits in our chart, which house it occupies, what the themes of the subject matters are. There's been a need to tackle certain things related to that part of the chart, and the muscles and the soul's strength in this area is weak, which is why these challenges are being put in front of us. This particular eclipse sets up a period that feels a little bit like a final exam or a final reckoning. Here we go, we are stronger, we have processed certain things, we are at a place where we get to enter the battlefield, pick up the sword once more, develop these muscles, and go in and tackle what needs to be tackled. It is in the tackling that it's the tackling that's the purpose. It's not so much getting an A+ in your final exam as much as it is doing your best to prepare and going in and doing it to the best of your ability. There will be magic when you do it, there will be growth, there can very well be triumph. But you've got to lean into it and deal with it. Now, in certain cases, January of this year, 2020, and April were months of forward movement. Yes, even the quarantine and lockdown of April was very much a time of forward movement, if you think about where we are in the world as a result of it. And then August of this year is going to again experience that kind of acceleration. The rest of the time, we're catching up to whatever it is that has been delivered to us. And so with this particular new moon solar eclipse, and over the next 2 months, there's a need again to kind of try and put behind us what needs to be put behind us energetically, so that we can be clean and fresh and take care of and move in the direction we need to move to. The rest of 2020 to some extent involves now very much dealing with past issues and putting them behind us. Certainly after December 2020, it is fresh new energy. Fresh new energy. Now, as I've mentioned to you before, this summer, after this new moon, the next important date for me is June the 25th, in 3 or 4 days' time, when Venus, which has been retrograde, goes direct. So these next 3 or 4 days are actually in some ways the murkiest, where no one really knows what to do. The time period of confusion, really a lot of it coming from what has the pandemic meant for us in terms of as far as Venus is concerned, as far as our relationships are concerned, as far as our finances are concerned, what do we value? How do we align our finances against where it is that we want to go? And with Mercury now retrograde, and this week till June the 25th, this week with both Mercury and Venus retrograde, and both slow, there's a deliberate confusion around trying to figure out Mercury, planning, cognition, communication related items, and needing to, it's as if the relationship and financial reckoning, getting real, figuring out what we value, figuring out how to align our relationships and finances around what we value, given where we are at right now gives way to a communication, a mental, a cognitive, a planning component to that. A need to go over details, go over plans, go over communications, go over a sense of our mind now needs to, our mind, our mouths, our fingers, our writing needs to now start to take a bit of a break and start to align with everything that has come up with this drudging that we've been doing from a relationship perspective. I'm going to talk more about Venus going direct in a separate video, but just know that this next few days are really the most confused, and if it's not confused, static part of the summer. The best way to make use of this energy is where there are things that are pending that need to be taken care of. If you have the energy and if it feels right to continue, and if you have no choice but to do it, you have an application that's been pending for a while or things from the past, go ahead and give that your energy. Finish up what can be finished up, but just remember, people are not going to be certain or not going to be clear, especially during this week, about how to proceed. People are going to be very reluctant and very nervous about committing. This energy will become better after the 25th of June, certainly after the 30th of June, and will really become so much more solid, so much more clear after July the 15th. Okay, now we know what it is that we want to do to some extent. The second thing about this Mercury, this new moon solar eclipse period, of course, is the fact that Mercury is retrograde. We've already covered the fact that there's a need to, in terms of communication and cognition, deal with things thematically that have required attention since July 2018 and have been bubbling. Indeed, these are things that may have come up within those dates that I mentioned to you, not the 2001 date, which is an energetic link to the last eclipse in this degree that we had yesterday, but the dates I mentioned since July 2018. I'll give you an interesting factoid. In Donald Trump's chart, July the 12th, 2018 marked the time period. Within a week of that eclipse, there were photographs that emerged of him and Vladimir Putin. Anything that, and it's also happening in a part of a chart that brings visibility perhaps to hidden or murky. His life has not been the same since July 2018. In terms of the scrutiny, in terms of what may have been exposed, it's not an issue of me being politically one-sided or another. The alliance, quote unquote, with Russia, whatever its characteristics, some people may be a fan of and some people may not be a fan of. So no matter where, basically since that time, whatever may have been wondered about prior to that time became evident, increasingly evident since that time. And this summer is a time for him to, there's no question, he's got to deal with that over the next 2 months. And very much, I would imagine that whatever's going to occur in November, if he makes it through the summer, he's got to make it through the summer. And by make it through, I mean contend with hidden things that may occur. There's a certain amount of murkiness that's going to be back, maybe a certain amount of exposure that's going to come through over the summer that's going to need to be contended with. So that's what I mean by thematically things are here that have to be dealt with, lent into, managed. And sometimes with eclipses, certain things are karmic. You can't necessarily, what does it mean to lean into things, to take care? A lot of it depends on where these eclipses are happening in your chart. But a second relevant feature, the first feature that I mentioned with this new moon solar eclipse, is Venus being retrograde at this time. So at the time of the eclipse, Venus is retrograde, dealing with past people, past issues, evaluating relationships. Even though Venus goes direct on the 25th of June, and the energy will become more decisive with regard to what we value, what we esteem, and how to line up our finances and relationship decisions and choices around those, and we start to gather some momentum and exercise some choice, both after the 25th of June, but especially after the 12th of July, once Mercury also goes direct. The imprint of this eclipse very much requires us in terms of our communication and cognition and our relationship and financial issues to deal with past things that have been brewing since July 2018. And as I said, it is a kind of a final exam. It is a whatever you have learned, whatever you have processed, whatever you have been challenged by, it's a once more into the breach to tackle this. as annoying and frustrating as it is that you're having to deal with past issues at this time, it is absolutely essential so that you don't carry those energies with you as the months progress. That you deal and nip in the bud and put in place what you need to put in place so that you can be free and done with certain energies in order to embrace the new. And embracing the new is going to continue to become a theme right after June the 30th, once Mars enters Aries for a 6-month stint. But it especially becomes relevant and important once Jupiter and Saturn enter Aquarius in December of 2020. 2021 is all new. And we've been given a sample of this between March and June of this year with regard to where it is that we're going to need to focus on. The third thing related to this new moon that is important is the fact that Jupiter and Pluto, both retrograde now, are going to be conjunct on June the 29th. They were conjunct the first time on April the 4th when news about the pandemic expanded, and also the Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions are happening in the sign of Capricorn. I've done separate videos in Capricorn. You can search through my current transits list and find them. Eclipses in Capricorn, eclipse on July the 4th in Capricorn. I'm going to deal with Capricorn energies in a separate video, but there is, wherever there's been a forest fire that's been burning and and things needing to be, social structures, endings and new beginnings, revolutions, expansion of transformation and death. As we have already experienced, and as I've mentioned for a while here, as we head towards June the 29th, even though there's the energy of opening up, there's going to be a need to reckon with an expansion of the pandemic. Now, whether it is an expansion on the scale of what we saw around April the 4th, whether it is an expansion of numbers because of increased testing, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is these planets are retrograde. It's a sign of, no, we're not done. And no, we need to assess and revisit certain decision-making and what we have learned. The final Jupiter-Pluto conjunction is on November the 12th, interestingly, right after the election. So I wonder, as I said, I'm going to do a separate video on Capricorn, but you can't ignore, because it's a new moon solar eclipse in Cancer with a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction that is very, very close, setting up for a new moon lunar eclipse on July the 4th. You can't ignore the fact that transformative energies, when it comes to conservative social and political situations, are very much at play. And this idea of revolution, the 4th, this new moon in Cancer does not make any huge transits or aspects. The last new moon in Gemini, that video I titled War and Peace, was very much about a conflict of the new moon in Gemini and planets in Pisces, or the full moon in Sagittarius lunar eclipse and the planets in Pisces. This new moon solar eclipse has no major aspecting it. There's a cleanness to it. It really is much more retrospective. It's really much more about, look, new energies, we've had them in place, we've given you a sense of what the new energies that are going to be present after December of this year. We've had things come to a head by June the 4th. Here now is not a blank slate, actually a previous slate. Here now is the opportunity to clean up past things and move towards graduating and taking this final exam in the sign of Cancer and dealing with the Capricorn, dealing with the old eclipse axis of Cancer and Capricorn and where that sits in your chart, finishing that up now over the summer and into the fall so that we can continue to move into the new, which has already been announced so far. So while there are no major aspects related to this new moon, and while the rulership of this new moon is totally clear because the new moon is in Cancer, Cancer is ruled by the moon is in Cancer. It's a powerful new moon. It's a powerful new moon. Identify what needs to be contended with, what may have been a challenge, what may have been opportunities. The idea of challenge and opportunities depends on which part of your chart this is occurring in. In addition, even though this new moon solar eclipse makes no aspects, it depends on what it is that is aspecting in your chart. As I mentioned yesterday, in the birth chart of India, this new moon solar eclipse is conjunct the planet Mars. So ideas of conflict and self-assertion and self-confidence and wounded ego or defense and attack, all of that are going to be themes, whether it leads to outright conflict or whether somewhere a sense of self-esteem and self-worth has to be examined and built up and dealt with in an egoic masculine way. Those are going to be themes that, for example, India is going to deal with. Each of us some of us may have this new moon solar eclipse aspecting certain points in our chart, some of us may not, but those transits and those aspects are important as well. Is this new moon solar eclipse in 0° Cancer conjunct or square or opposite some point in your chart? Those become important factors to consider. Okay, but these three things occurring at the time of the new moon solar eclipse are important. A retrograde Venus getting ready to go direct, a retrograde Mercury, and no major aspects related to the new moon, but a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction retrograde in Capricorn in the sign of the full moon eclipse, auguring a year of turmoil and a year of endings and new beginnings and an expansion of death to some extent in very literal terms. Certainly an ending and new beginning in terms of power and power structures. This does not mean that the election outcome in November in the United States is a slam dunk, by the way. A lot depends on how the summer goes for our current president. A lot depends on that as far as the charts are concerned. A lot depends on that. What is an open question for me is, I think that Saturn's presence in Aquarius between March and the end of June in this year has made it clear what our priorities are going to be when Saturn enters Aquarius for good in December, around equality. And the forces are going to go from conservative to liberal, but will they go from conservative to liberal because there will be a different president in place, or will they have to go from conservative to liberal because it's the same president in place? And the idea of revolution or revolutionary resistance is going to become absolutely paramount. Remains to be seen. As I look at charts, I'll do more videos on that as time goes on, but it's not a slam dunk. It is a tricky summer for the President of the United States. It is a tricky summer. But the new moon solar eclipse is all about dealing now with past issues that have been placed, that you've been challenged to deal with. You know so much more. It's going to be scary to do it because those muscles are weak, but go in there and challenge it and deal with it and put certain things to bed and nip them in the bud and take care of them. So much of what I wanted to convey in this video, I have. The closest aspect that this new moon makes is a quincunx to Saturn in 0° of Aquarius. Saturn is retrograde, about to move back into Capricorn. And here we have it. A challenge with this new moon solar eclipse, and it's pretty exact. It's not a major transit from a Western astrological perspective, but you can't ignore it. You absolutely can't ignore it. Somewhere the energies of revolution and equality and rational value and rational humanitarian activities is somehow in conflict with the preservation of those things that we feel we need to protect. The new moon solar eclipse is in 0° Cancer, a sign of protection, a relatively conservative sign, a sign of nurture, a sign of holding on to things emotionally and protecting them and wanting to see them grow. 0° of Aquarius is about the new. It's about rationally moving towards liberal and humanitarian ideals. Rationally. The idea of things being liberal and being sort of out there, let's just move that to the sign of Pisces and Aquarius. It's a very rational, very political, very social, very activist, but very totally rational. Is there a reason why two people cannot be considered equal? If there's not, then they are equal. That is Aquarian energy. It's not, let me smoke out and think about consciousness and want to merge and it's not Piscean in its all-embracing, unquestioning spiritual unity. It is discerning, and it is about the practical application of humanitarian and social ideals that have been in place since, that are there. So there is an awkward seesaw at the time of this new moon solar eclipse between the preservation and the nurture of things that we're emotionally attached to and the rational, dispassionate, um, um, uh, quality that is being brought to the emotional, intuitive, nurturing quality of a moon in Cancer, of a new moon in Cancer, needing to, a quincunx is like two liquids it's like oil and water. They're going to sit beside each other. They're never going to dissolve. So one of them has to do with the moon in Cancer and dealing with past issues. One of them is dealing with the old, protecting yourself, nurturing yourself, finishing up old tasks. But the new moon in Cancer, on a certain level, has a nurturing, protective element to it. Saturn in Aquarius is about a dispassionate, unemotional, totally rational and real, setting the foundation for humanitarian, for what is good for humanity. And there's something about this new moon solar eclipse that it doesn't keep it in conflict, it just doesn't mix. And some of that has to do with the fact that we have to somehow hold and manage dealing with the past and past issues that have been placed and are challenging us and are required to be dealing with because they help us grow. Not help us, they're essential for our growth. You have to deal with these issues now, okay? And they've come up again. And they're related to things that have been in place since July 2018. But then there's also the new that we've been given a sample of since Saturn has briefly been in Aquarius between March and June the 29th of this year. Now Saturn is going back into Capricorn again to finish up the old before both Saturn and Jupiter together move into Aquarius one final time for good in December of this year. So the old and the new sit beside each other, cannot be dissolved. It behooves us to deal with the old, but the new is there and is gonna, that's where we have to keep our eye. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Wow, we're actually getting through this. I'm going to leave it at this. We talked about what a new moon means, the eclipse dates, the objective versus subjective, the objective versus subjective, the objective Saturn in Aquarius, quincunxing, creating this need to stand in the middle of the seesaw between the objective and the humanitarian and the future, and the emotional, nurture, intuitive need to tackle certain things from the past. There's a subjective quality to this new moon in Cancer. We've talked about Mercury being retrograde, Venus being retrograde, so soon to go direct. We've talked about the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. I'm just looking and seeing if there's anything. That's it, folks. That's it. This is an important eclipse. This is an important opportunity. This is your final exam, where you have needed to, what you need to go in and try and do your best at. I was going to say, go in and try and ace it by all means. You may not be able to because the muscles are not strong enough, but this is why you have North Node eclipses, because they are skills that you are meant to acquire, courage you're meant to build, action you're required to take. And this is your new moon solar eclipse that allows you to go in and tackle issues that have somehow been in place and have required tackling, that you're intuitively aware of, that have a subjective, nurture, self-protective component. You've got to channel your inner mother. You've got to care about yourself in a maternal, fierce, uncompromising, protective way, either to get certain things done if the eclipses are in more benign and positive parts of your chart, or to deal with protecting yourself in certain ways if they're in a more challenging part of your chart. See where Cancer sits in your chart. Try and identify where you've needed to lean into and why you've needed to lean into this part of the chart since July the 12th, 2018, and go in there and deal with it. June 20th, 21st to August 20th is one time frame, and then from a communication and a Mercury perspective, the Mercury cycle that starts up on June the 30th, when a retrograde Mercury meets up with the Sun in Cancer, starts up another cycle that takes you through goodness. Why?